Alright, this is going to be a long one, but this is not a hype video or a montage. This is me actually checking and servicing my bike after a crash. I went over the bars, I landed shoulder first, I broke my collarbone, bent the hoods, smashed my helmet, knocked myself out, got cut out of my lycra. So before I even think about riding again, I need to know one thing. Is this bike actually safe? This is my bike. It's a $500 Facebook Marketplace special. It's about 15 years old and it owes me absolutely nothing. But I'm not riding it unless I completely trust it. I'm not a bike mechanic, I'm just quite careful and I don't like hospital food, so I'd like to make sure it's alright. In this video, it's literally me going through the bike step by step, explaining what I'm checking, why I'm checking it, and how I decide if something's good or fucked, basically. Also, yeah, I've still got my sling on and this was an absolute ball ache to record one-handed, so you'll have to forgive me. When people crash, they usually look at the obvious stuff. Bent bars, scratched levers, snapped derailleur. The dangerous stuff is actually invisible damage. Frames crack, steerers crack, and wheels go out of true. Dropouts bend. The worst thing you can do is go, it looks alright, and then find out when you're going 60 kilometers an hour down a hill that it wasn't. So the rule for the whole video is nothing gets assumed and you gotta check everything. So first thing before checking anything is clean the bike. You can't inspect a dirty bike properly. Dirt hides cracks, grease hides the damage, and everything either looks better or worse than it actually is. I'm not going to do a showroom clean and get the polish out and stuff, but just enough so I can actually see metal and carbon and degrease the drivetrain, wipe the frame down and clean around the welds and the joints, especially around the welds and like high stress areas because it's usually where cracks start to appear. Frame first, always, because if the frame's fucked then nothing else matters. I'd start from the top down. I'd be looking at the head tube, top and bottom, down tube near the head tube, the seat tube junction, especially underneath the bottom bracket area and the top of the bottom bracket area, as these are some big welds down here, the chain stays and seat stays, and the dropouts. What I'm actually looking for is hairline cracks, like paint lines that don't follow the tube, bubbling or flaking paint's quite an obvious tell, and anything that looks new that you haven't seen before. This is the tap test. This works better on a carbon frame, however aluminium still definitely sounds different when you're tapping it. You don't need any fancy tools, just something metal. I'm using the socket from my chain whip. So you tap along the tube and listen to the noise. Good metal or carbon sounds sharp and consistent, and if you hit over the top of a crack, it will sound dull, dead, and it won't have a ring to it, it'll just sound different. You're not rushing this because if one spot sounds different, you're gonna stop and investigate. From there, I would sight the bike. So I don't actually have a service stand, but when I sight the bike, I'll look from the front, from the back, and the wheels should line up with the frame. The seat tube shouldn't look twisted and the frame shouldn't look twisted. It's really low tech, but your eyes are pretty good if you actually line it up and use them properly. Forks cop huge amounts of forces in a crash. This is where bikes usually fail catastrophically after a crash. What you need to check for is the fork legs, going down to the wheels, the crown, and the steerer tube. I'm checking for cracks around the crown, especially underneath. And if you've got a carbon steerer, you absolutely do not fuck around here. Same tap test, but on the forks. My forks are carbon, so you can hear that it sounds different to the frame. However, if you still tapped over a crack, you generally would notice the difference in noise. After this, I would check my headset play. After a crash, your headset could get loose or knock something loose in there. To do this, I would apply my front brake, rock the bike, and listen for any knocking or any jarring or any moving within the headset itself. So usually, if this bike was going back on the road, I would have taken the bar tape off also. However, because I did notice a catastrophic failure in the top tube, I'm using this bike as an indoor trainer until I can afford a new road bike. So the hoods on the bars itself, there was no twisting in the middle. I checked the twisting as far as I could see, and the hoods had bent inwards. My bars are aluminium, so once that's bent once, it's done. It's weaker forever. So personally on the bars, I'd be checking for any bends or cracks, especially near the clamp, the stem, the clamp area, and the faceplate, any kind of pivoting and twisting. Your levers and your hoods, you want to be making sure that it is actually, in my case, it was just skewed around and it just needs loosening and tightening again, but you want to make sure that it's not actually bent and they pivot and still move smoothly. This is not just a send it and ignore it area. If you're unsure, honestly, just replace it. It's cheaper than new teeth. Wheels next. So spin your wheel and you can watch the wheel, watch the rim against the brake pads or the frame. The brake pads, if you've got rim brakes like this, are a really good tell to tell if your wheels are still in true or not. Usually my end was a front end crash. Your front wheel will take a lot of the force. Obviously, if it's enough force to break your forks, then it's enough force to damage your wheel. So spin them, watch the rim against the pad. Side to side wobble needs tuning. So if you got like a little bit of wobble, maybe a few millimeters either side, then it just needs truing to get it back straight again. If there's a big hop, if it's not just wobbling, if it's hopping, if there's a big skip in the profile as it spins, then that's rim damage, and yeah, your rim's done for. I squeeze the spokes in pairs. They should feel very similar. One loose spoke after a crash usually means that most of the others will be stressed too. There is actually a testing tool that you can get that will test each spoke. You clamp it onto the spoke and it will tell you how much resistance it has. However, you have to put this on each individual spoke, and I mean, if you're just feeling it by hand to see if the wheel's worth saving or not, that's good enough to tell you whether to spend that extra time truing the wheel and getting it back to normal. It's worth checking your hub bearings also. As you spin your wheel, it's worth putting your ear close to it and just hearing if there's any roughness or anything within the hub. To be honest, if it's an old bike like mine, it's going to sound rough as shit anyway, but any grinding and slowing the wheel down, then obviously it's an issue. Now, as part of the cleaning process, if you have the tools, I would suggest stripping your drivetrain down and degreasing properly. I'm taking my cassette off, checking for bent teeth, any play, any wear, giving it a good clean properly. Also, part of your drivetrain check, you should be checking your hanger alignment visually. Bent hangers will ruin your shifting and could possibly snap your derailleur. It will probably need a tweak anyway. You'll have to redo your gearing somewhat, usually after a crash, or even, to be honest, after taking the wheel off the bike, your gears usually jump a little bit. Now, my bike has rim brakes. Like I said, it's 15 years old, and I mean, it doesn't owe me anything. I would still check the brakes after a crash. If you have disc brakes, check the rotor hub. Definitely look for bent rotors while your wheel's spinning as well, and check your pad wear. I mean, with a rim brake, it's a little different. You could notice your pads being misaligned. Your pads could spin around and not line up with the wheel anymore, so you want to tighten that up and dial the pads back in. Also, while you're here, you might as well just check your pad wear. I noticed on mine that my pads were pretty much done for as well. I probably should have checked that earlier, but you know. I would check the saddle and the seat post. You want to take that seat post out, just give it an inspect. Cracks here can be sneaky, so you want to have a really good look. I had already checked mine before I re-greased it to put it back in the frame. However, I would clean it off fully and check like you would your frame, especially if you have a carbon seat post. So after all this, you've decided that your bike is safe to go back on the roads. You have no catastrophic failures on your bike, or you've replaced the parts that you needed to replace from the failure. Putting it back together slowly. You need to put everything back together nice and slowly, grease where needed, and torque your bolts where required. This is where a lot of crashes happen. People will just rush the rebuild, and then before you know it, you've clamped your stem bolts too tight and they're gonna snap halfway down the road. As you can see, I have retired this bike to an indoor trainer now. As you can see, the frame took a huge knock in the crash. It must have been from my knee hitting the top tube. I have a huge dent and a lot of chip paint around where the dent is, so I won't be trusting this bike back on the roads. Also, it's time to retire it anyway. I've done a few Ks on this bike, and like I said, it cost me $500. It's not worth putting back on the road now. So now we're back on the trainer. Cassette's been cleaned and checked. I've re-greased the chain. I've re-greased the cassette. So I've mounted it back on the trainer now. My final safety check, I've checked the frame, I've checked the forks, I've checked the cockpit's still solid, I've checked the wheels are true, and I've checked the brakes are working, and there's no weird noises. If anything feels off, it doesn't get ridden. For example, a big dent in your frame. So yeah, that's how I check my bike after a crash. It's boring, it's slow, and it's definitely not TikTok friendly, but it's the difference between training and sitting on the couch injured again in a few weeks' time. This bike's never going back on the road, it's staying on the trainer now, and obviously I can't ride a bike on the road for a while anyway, so I'm going to just be sat on this thing spinning for most of the time. If this helped, then cool, but if it didn't help, then at least you know how to not die. Alright, I'm gonna go sit down now.